Hello, I'm Bruce.
Hi, I'm Aditya.
We are the Risky Scientists, and this is our main episode for the week. And we're going to have another special guest, an interview. So, always very excited to have special guests. So, over to Aditya.
So today's special guest we have Emlen Metz, and Emlen, would you care to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Emlen. I'm a postdoc at UC Berkeley. I work technically in the physics department, but I'm a psychologist. I study psychology of epistemology, so how people decide what to believe and what beliefs to act on, and how to change their beliefs when they do that, which sometimes we don't do often enough. I'm also really interested in science education. And so right now with the COVID crisis and all of this information rolling around and all this confusion, it's a great time to be thinking about these things.
Very well said. It seems like an important time to be thinking about beliefs and changing beliefs. And I guess I should say that Emlen and I have known each other for a while, and worked a little bit on some educational projects as well. So it'd be great to at some point, either on this episode or future episodes, get to education as well. So today's episode, we want to talk about evidence more broadly, and what sort of information we might need in order to either make a belief in the first place. And it sounds weird to make a belief, but I kind of like that framing that you shouldn't come in with preconceived beliefs, or to change beliefs. And it seems to me that there's this problem more generally that we're seeing now in the pandemic. We're seeing in response to many of the current events that are very politically fraught now, with how people perceive and digest information. So, question for you, Emlen: what, in your experience, is prompting people to kind of speak about and share information that they're given very much ad hoc, without thinking about evidence, or maybe being as careful as they should? And we've all seen this on Facebook and other social media that we talked about a little earlier. We did an episode on social media. So
yeah, I mean, I think social media has really changed this so much, because it just makes it so easy to share some new tidbit that may or may not be true with all your friends and followers. And, that's really tempting, especially if it's some new piece of information or potential information that is really interesting or sort of surprising or shocking. You want to share it with everyone. You want to be the one that says that found it. You get sort of this little status boost, this little ego boost of like, oh, look at this information. This is so interesting. But I think even more than that, there's really this intense polarization going on in this country, which as of recently has spilled into literal fights in the streets. It's been getting more and more dramatic. I think our president has something to do with that, but there are probably a lot of factors. So just the idea that we have these beliefs, and we have these representations of ourselves and the kinds of people we are and the kinds of things that we stand for, and one way of performing that and demonstrating that is sharing information, especially information that helps show that we are this kind of person, that this is what we stand for, and this is the kind of thing that we believe in.
Fascinating. So it seems like you're making the point that that sharing information is a form of expressing one's beliefs, which fits very well with this concept of polarization. But I mean, I think we would all agree that as scientists, that polarization can be a problem when it's not driven by spirited discourse necessarily, but by entrenching in one's beliefs. So, I mean, what are methods that we can use to address this? We've talked a lot about science, and we've tried to talk a lot about science, but Emlen, I'm sure you have a very unique perspective, both as a psychologist and as somebody who's worked in education, trying to help people with this. That problem.
Well, it's really tricky. There's sort of some classic research back from the 70s that found that if you show people arguments on both sides of an issue, that they'll remember the pieces of information and the arguments that support the belief they came in with, and they'll come up with reasons to doubt or undermine the arguments against the belief they came in with, and sometimes they'll even come out with an even stronger version of the belief they came in with, even if they've seen arguments on both sides. Later research found that that effect is actually pretty fragile. So it really varies a lot depending on the context and how it's set up. So that's good news. Give people information on both sides, and it doesn't necessarily polarize them further. But you asked, how do we reduce that? how do we reduce the polarization? I don't have a great answer, but I think one way that we may ultimately need is that it's not enough just to give people information on both sides. You really need to change the way that people are thinking about this. And one of those things is, confirmation bias is just incredibly pervasive. And that's sort of what I was talking about, where you look for information that supports what you already believe. And when you see information that supports what you believe, you take it much less critically than if you come up on something that might make you doubt it. And with all information, nearly all information, it's possible to find some room for doubt, because there is room for doubt, because our representations of reality are, there's some gaps, there's some uncertainty. Even, something that's in front of your eyes, you could be dreaming, you could be hallucinating. Maybe someone is setting up an illusion, like magic tricks. And that's, the most, something that's right in front of your eyes, even that isn't completely reliable. So of course, when there's room for uncertainty, then to some extent you get to pick, well, what are you going to doubt? Can you doubt everything? Well, maybe you can doubt everything, but that's quite difficult.
Yeah.
I think what we really need is to teach people to engage in particular practices of thinking where they're trying actively to seek out information against their beliefs and arguments against their beliefs, and really being aware that they're about the temptation to be more critical of that and say, okay, no, I'm really going to try to take this seriously. I'm really going to try to consider it. And conversely, when you're looking at information that supports your beliefs, saying, okay, I know that I'm inclined to just accept this at face value because I want to believe this. And I'm going to try to think about it critically. Are there other explanations for this data other than what I want the explanation to be? Is this data from a trustworthy source, and not just from a source that happens to agree with me? And engaging in those kinds of practices, I think, is probably ultimately going to be the only way to get people to reduce polarization, and really pay attention to the other side. And how do you get people to do that? Education, practice, and modeling, I guess.
Can I jump in here? So Emlen, this is very stimulating for me, and there's a lot of crossover with other episodes we've done. And I appreciate how you ended that last statement with some practical advice. I just want to go back to I don't know if we could call these caveats, but I think concerns, right? So somebody in the audience could have concerns about how you are framing the problem, right? So some of the problem here could be manipulated by others than your good self to actually intensify a homogenization of belief. So somebody could say, if we want to avoid polarization, then we need to herd around consensus, right? And that would be a different problem, or actually be more of the problem, right? So somebody could say, there are two sides to this story, but clearly one is right, and you should come to our side. We're right. So let's explore these caveats a bit. So I can imagine the audience can be listening to some of the way you're framing this. This is not. I'm not criticizing your framing, but this is just a problem with the English language. So if we say, like, you study what people believe and how we can change their beliefs, there's a problem there, because now that sounds like we're proactively changing what people believe, and the audience can react against that. They're like, wait a minute, I have my beliefs.
They're mine.
Yeah, they're mine, but also who are you to say, or who are we to say what you should believe? And then there's the polarization thing, which I think is, we need to unpack this, because polarization, the reaction against polarization, I agree, polarization is a problem, but the reaction against polarization can lead to reductionism, where we reduce to acceptable views. And we say, if you don't accept these fashionable or consensual views, then you are polarized, and you are polarizing in the wrong way, and we're implicitly polarizing in the correct way. And I got a good example of this, right? So Hillary Clinton was a presidential campaigner in 2016, and one of her problematic statements was she referred to the opposition as a basket of deplorables. And the basket of deplorables reacted very strongly against that. So wait a minute, so they're not deplorables, and you are polarizing it. So I think there was a real irony here, that Hillary Clinton, of all people, she was very keen to speak the narrative that we are polarized, we need to come together, but she was very polarizing. She was polarizing for lots of reasons, and that statement was polarizing, and it illustrates this problem of you can criticize polarization and then say there are unacceptable poles which we're just going to kick out and ignore and reduce to the consensus. So I think we need to unpack that, and I don't know whether it's unfair for me to ask you to talk about that, because this might be outside of your research. But what do you think? I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a real issue. So I think there's sort of two issues that I see in what you're talking about. There's both sidesism, where you say, well, if you really want to be open-minded, then you gotta be able to consider both sides. But sometimes one of the sides is really outrageous, like I would say climate change. Climate change deniers. There are quite a lot of them. Most of them are not scientists. In fact, very few of them are scientists. But they're out there, and some of them are in positions of power. And do we need to engage with them? I would say, actually, at this point, because it's so widespread in the case of climate change, we do need to engage with them, because they're having influence on policy, and not. And engaging with someone doesn't mean agreeing with them. It means understanding where they're coming from, so that you can have a fruitful conversation, and try to come to some place, if not of consensus, then at least of figuring out, okay, what are the sources of our disagreement, so that we can at least communicate. So that's sort of both sidesism, and I think that is a danger. You want to have your mind open, but you don't want to have your mind so open that everything falls out. On the other hand, there's this issue of, sometimes it pushes towards a moderation. And you say, well, if you're always considering both sides, then you're always going to wind up somewhere in the middle. And maybe there are some issues where the middle isn't the right place to be. And I think that's true too, that the middle is not always the right place to be. And even Aristotle, with his golden doctrine of the mean, would agree with this. Some scholars have, I think, really misinterpreted Aristotle and taking him to be saying, you should just be moderate in all things. And that means be sort of in the middle in all things. But that's not what he says. He says the right amount for the context, for the circumstance. It's being responsive to the particulars of the situation. And that means, if someone accidentally, steps on the back of your heel, and you're annoyed, if you turn around and you yell at them and you're furious, then that's inappropriate. That's an excessive anger. But if someone, like kicks your dog, then, more anger is probably appropriate.
Yeah, wait a minute. What if the dog's attacking you, right? There could be context here.
Yeah, well, exactly. So you need to pay attention to the particulars of the situation. to figure out what's appropriate. And of course, different people are going to be picking out different aspects of the particular. So one person will say, but it's just a little dog, he can't actually hurt you. Okay, so he was sort of jumping on you, or he was jumping on you, but he was just excited to see you. He wasn't attacking you. And the other person, well, I have I'm scared of dogs and I felt attacked. There are lots of particulars of the situation that you can draw out, and you can draw those out in conversation and by actually listening to, okay, this other person has this really different perspective and is seeing the situation in a really different way. Why? How are they seeing it, and why are they seeing it that way? And that doesn't mean I have to see it the same way at all. I may not change my mind about anything, but if I want to communicate with that other person, then I need to understand where they're coming from. And if we don't communicate, then we're certainly not going to be able to come to any kind of consensus about what to do. And consensus doesn't necessarily mean we agree about the way the world is, or we share all the same values. It can just mean, we've come to some kind of compromise decision about what to do about a problem that faces both of us, say.
Yeah, but so I can still see this those reactions from the audience to the way you're framing this. And I want to repeat, I don't think this is your fault. I think this is just the limitations of language. Right. So let's take the dog. Right, if the dog's jumping up on you, a lot of what you're talking about is the fundamental attribution error. So if you are let's say the victim of this dog, so a dog comes and starts jumping at you, you're scared of dogs, you don't know whether the dog is aggressive, you don't know whether it's carrying COVID-19, you don't want the dog jumping up at you. You're correct that we could be mindful of the fundamental attribution error and not have default negative attributions that the dog is aggressive, or the dog is a threat, or that this dog is causing us any harm. But at the same time, we could say that dog should be leashed. Mm-hmm. So we already have a default grievance. So we can correct for the fundamental attribution error and still say, I still have a grievance, your dog is unleashed. So we can't always correct out the negative attributions of our interactions with other people. True. And then the other thing I want to note is the way you're going in your last statement, it almost sounded like the talk it out. There's this sort of talk it out. This is my term for it. A talk it out solution to everything, that everything can be solved by just talking it out. So if people have a disagreement, if they don't understand each other, even if nation states have disagreements, we can just talk it out. And so this is very clear in international relations, which I deal with a lot, where two states have fundamental disagreements, so they want the same territory, and they both have reasons to want that same territory. And then somebody will come along and say, well, we can talk this out. Well, sometimes you can't talk it out. So I don't know what to call it, but talk it outism annoys me. And so I'm not saying that's what you are prescribing in your statement, but we need to be mindful that not everything can be talked out. And some in the audience might hear that, oh, this isn't realistic, it's not practical, that not all situations can be solved with the prescriptions that you're implying. So I'm not saying I'm not saying you're not mindful of all these things, but can we unpack these caveats and mm-hmm. practical problems in correcting for attributions, correcting for misunderstandings, when there are more fundamental issues than just misunderstandings. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right that there are cases where there are fundamentally different desires or different goals, and they conflict, and it's zero sum, and either I get this piece of pie or you do, and we can't share it. Say it's an unshareable piece of pie. or maybe neither of us wants to share it even. Maybe we could share it, but I don't want to share it with you, and you don't want to share it with me, and neither of us is willing to do that. I mean, there are cases where that happens, for sure. And there, I don't think, figuring out, getting clear about the beliefs and the way reality is sometimes reveals that. Sometimes it reveals that we have incompatible desires. And then, how do you deal with that? I don't have a fantastic solution. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, I just want to say that when it's possible to talk it out, that seems preferable. And even when it's not possible to talk it out, if you can at least use the talk it out strategy to get clear about exactly where are our desires incompatible, so that at least we're not winding up with an outcome that's worse for everybody. Assuming that there's not this sort of spite where sometimes people are willing to take a worse outcome to give a worse outcome to their enemy. And I think that is, that's not super rare, but I think it's, not really ideal. But maybe that's my utilitarian instincts coming in.
Oh my goodness, you brought utilitarianism into it, which is a whole philosophical branch.
Yeah, we don't have to go there.
Good.
I'm not saying I'm a utilitarian strictly, but I think there are some considerations that are quite useful.
Yeah.
But that's going a bit abroad. But maybe we should go back to beliefs, because in the case of beliefs, it's not about conflicting desires, it's about conflicting beliefs. And there, you can still have ultimately conflicting beliefs. I believe in God and you don't, say. And neither of us can prove it. Neither of us can persuade the other. And that's okay. And sometimes, and you said, maybe too much actively open-minded thinking might lead to everyone homogeneity of belief. And I agree with you that that's not necessarily a good thing in the extreme. We don't want to live in an Orwellian society in which everyone believes exactly the same thing. That would be super boring. And also probably a lot of our beliefs that we all shared would be wrong. Because in fact, the world is immensely complex, and most of our representations all of our representations are partial and incomplete and imperfect. So if everyone has exactly the same representation of everything, then I don't think we would get very far.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and there's so much to talk about here. We'll have to try a few more episodes on the philosophy elements, but it feels like when we're talking about beliefs, I'm seeing two threads come out here. One is that what is really the purpose of a belief? So there's this kind of, and we've talked about, for example, we had this guest on a previous episode who explained robust decision-making, Bill Marcelino, and the idea behind that whole process, as he described it, is can you get common outcomes with incompatible beliefs? And for example, Texas, I think, did a great job of this, where I'm not an expert on Texas, but they did a great job of, I think, investing in clean energy, even though not everyone thought that climate change was the reason to do so. So they did a good job on that. Now, clean energy, different topic for another time. But so it seems to me that there might be methods to have structured conversations, because I share the concern that just having a conversation, often talking it out doesn't even mean you're finding the middle ground. It just means the loudest voice wins. And then what's the point of having a conversation anyway? So yeah. I'm kind of, from my perspective, it seems like maybe science is a method, maybe not in isolation, but it can help with having that structured conversation.
Absolutely, yeah, especially for beliefs, just what's true. Science is incredibly powerful for figuring out good models of what's true, because, and the reason that it is, I think, there's a lot of reasons that it is, but the central power of science is its provisionality. It's good because it's uncertain, and that's kind of counterproductive. Not counterproductive, counterintuitive. um, but the idea is that because science is structured in such a way that it has to be revised as new evidence comes in, and moreover that it actually, scientists are actively seeking out new evidence, and the incentive structures are set up such that you really want to find problems with previous theories. You really want to find adjustments that need to be made, and sort of gaps and places where it doesn't quite work. And that means it's always improving, and a lot of that improvement is just, you know, adding details, but also it's making these revisions. And I mean, I think there's so much evidence that is effective. I mean, without that, we wouldn't have airplanes in the air. We have, you know, these little supercomputers in our pockets all the time that we can use to communicate with people on the other side of the planet. I mean, it's incredible what it's accomplished, what it's allowed us to accomplish.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe we should talk for a few moments. This has been a recurring theme, so it's not something brand new, but I think it'll be really good to get your perspective on it, because I want to get to your work on misinformation in a moment. But it seems like one part of the problem now is that science is often struggles. It seems, at least, like science often struggles to communicate its findings to the real world. I mean, all of us are scientists, and I think we are very familiar with the idea that most results are uncertain, and we've talked about p equals 0.05 before, and what that actually means. That it means that everything shouldn't be correct. But for someone who is less familiar with that particular area of science, even so, I mean, if you quoted some full psychological article, or if Bruce wanted to tell me about some event in political science, I would have to go based on the fact that I know both of you to be excellent scientists and say probably it's true. But then there's also things that we look for, I think, as scientists, to say, well, yeah, this claim seems reasonable, or that there's reason for skepticism. What are some of those things in your mind that are most important from the scientific perspective when evaluating evidence you're given, either from a scientist or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, that it's difficult to evaluate evidence, and any piece of evidence comes with some uncertainty that maybe it happened just by chance. There's noise. The world is very noisy, which is to say there's just a lot of random stuff going on, and anytime you look at it, there might be a pattern or something that looks like a pattern that's actually just coincidence. And it's hard to disentangle that. So I think maybe the number one thing I would say is some kind of replicability or consistency across contexts. So, you know, it's not just one study that found this correlation, but a bunch of studies. And it's not just in one country that you find this correlation, but in a bunch of countries. And then, you know, even if you can have a correlation between two things, say, and you can have it in every country in the world, and maybe there's still not a causal connection. Maybe it's some third variable, although that is a kind of causal connection. So then, you know, you look at how is this study done? Is the sample that they're using representative of the whole population that they're trying to make an inference about? I mean, we could talk all day about how to evaluate scientific evidence, but maybe if there's just one piece, it would be: are there multiple kinds of evidence to support this, or is there just one piece of evidence? And is there counter evidence? Are there exceptions? Does it seem like it's a pretty robust effect, or is it a really fragile effect? Because often if it's a fragile effect, then that might make it more likely that it's a coincidence, or because of something else that's going on that you're not aware of. But if you have a whole bunch of different kinds of evidence from different scientists, maybe who aren't related to each other, then it starts being more convincing. And that's sort of just going back to the uncertainty that any one person can be wrong, and often is. Any one finding can be misleading. and often is. And so you need to sort of take each piece and don't disregard it. Don't throw it away just because it's uncertain, because everything's uncertain. If you threw away everything that's uncertain, you'd be left with nothing. But take each piece and say, okay, here's some evidence for, say, vitamin D deficiency leads to worse cases of COVID-19. Okay, here's a little piece of evidence for that. Okay, I'm going to raise my belief in that a little bit. I'm not sure that's true, but it's possible. This seems plausible. Okay, I'll go with that. Okay, here's another piece of evidence for that. Okay, I'm going to increase my belief for that a little bit. And so having beliefs or representations that you're aware that you're taking as probable rather than 100% this is true, can allow you to have this kind of flexibility that lets you take in, new evidence that supports and then qualifies it, and maybe undermines it too. And you're using that belief. You can use that belief to make decisions, even if it's not completely sure. We use beliefs to make decisions that aren't sure all the time. Like, I'm going to cross the street, even though it's possible that a car could come hurtling around the corner and kill me. I'm going to take that risk because I'm pretty sure that's not going to happen at this particular intersection.